Hello and welcome to the NBA Outlet presented by OTGBasketball.com. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Kory Waldron, a.k.a. K-Wald Hoops. What's up, Kory?
Not much, Nick. I'm fired up. We talked a little bit off the pod just now. My knees are feeling real good, so I'm hyped.
He's feeling young today, not an old man. But plenty to talk about today. As always, before we get started, though, just a reminder, you can listen to the NBA Outlet on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, and now airing on Dash Radio. But plenty to talk about with the playoffs approaching, obviously, on April 14th. The Western Conference playoff race is starting to heat up, especially in that 8 seed. Right now, Minnesota's in the 8th spot, number 9, Clippers, number 10, Nuggets. Only 2 games separate all 3 teams. But today we're going to talk about a little bit about the Nuggets and TWolves. 2 teams that have been struggling, a lot of promise going into the season, have dealt with some injuries here and there. But both teams in their last 6 games, 2-4. And, they're fighting for that playoff spot, and we think they should be better, and they've lost to some bad teams. So what would you say, which of these teams you think has bigger issues right now, the Nuggets or the T-Wolves?
I think it's got to be the Timberwolves, and it's more so because the Nuggets aren't dealing with any major injuries. They're not dealing with the type of adversity that the Timberwolves are facing. Obviously, losing Jimmy Butler several weeks ago to the Houston Rockets was something the Timberwolves really couldn't overcome. You can't lose a star like that and really overcome it. We've seen them obviously take a step backwards since losing him. They've signed Derrick Rose, which did absolutely nothing. The rotations have not changed. The other night they played. I know I tweeted the box score out. They played I think
Memphis.
They played 8 guys in that game though, and only 6 of them played over 20 minutes, I believe, and then 2 guys were under 15. So, all the starters, Cat, Wiggins, all played, I think, around 43 to 44 minutes. I know Taj Gibson played 42 minutes. Jeff Teague played, I think, 43 minutes. Tibbs is just running those guys into the ground. And when they're already so thin, they don't have Jimmy Butler. It's not going to work, especially when you've already played, we played 72 games by this point, basically. You can't play these guys all year like this and then expect when you need them to win key games to get into the playoffs or to maintain a decent seed in the playoffs for them to also be playing at their very best. There's just too much on these guys already. The Nuggets have their own issues because their offense is stellar and their defense just hasn't really played up to the offense. But the Timberwolves are just so thin. That's the team with more issues to me.
And a couple players have come out and said, Tibbs needs to go to the bench more. We're tired. And especially late in the season down this stretch, it's not like they're going to get, any more rest. It's going to get intensified over the next 2 weeks probably before the playoffs. So definitely could hurt them. And then, like you mentioned, the Nuggets are kind of on the other end of the spectrum of the injury because they had their star acquisition of the summer get injured early on, and now he's coming back trying to get 100% while Jimmy Butler is injured, and there's no sign that he might not come back, at all this season. So especially if they don't make the playoffs. But an interesting stat about this team you mentioned, both these teams have really good offenses. The Timberwolves actually have the 4th offensive rating in the NBA, and the Nuggets have the 6th. Both teams are bad on defense, which is bad when you think of Tibbs. You're thinking good D. 24th in defensive rating, Nuggets 25th in defensive rating. So really similar in the sense that they both excel offensively and defensively. They have some big issues for playoff teams.
Well, you know what? Just a piggyback off that, you're not going to be a great defensive team when you have to play 44 minutes a game.
Yep.
It takes away from that part of the floor. I honestly believe, I know Karl-Anthony Towns is not a great defender by any means, and same thing with Wiggins. If both those guys, though, were playing a reasonable amount of minutes, you may see more out of them on the defensive end. But when you're expecting them to play basically a full game and also be, the 25-plus point scorers you need them to be, they're not going to play, first off, every possession on defense. And late in the game, they're not going to have enough energy to play late in the game like that on defensive side of the ball. It's just those two things go against each other. You can't have guys playing so many minutes and then expect them to be defensive studs. And that's been the issue with Timberwolves. And that's why I think, Tibbs could be out of a job sooner than we think.
And you mentioned it, in playing 40 minutes definitely takes a toll. And I would probably argue that defense is at least 50% effort. And if you don't have the energy and you need to put up points like you mentioned, it's definitely a big deal. So this playoff race, I think you mentioned, he could be out of a job. Also, Mike Malone in Denver has been mentioned as a guy who hasn't got the best out of that team. So, this fight for that spot could end up, costing somebody a job, or who knows, the Clippers could swoop in there and knock both these teams out.
Yeah, and there's a lot of I don't know about proven, but Dave Fizdale's out there. Jason Kidd obviously is out there. Frank Vogel is rumored to be out there. So I mean, there are head coaches still out there that are going to be looking for a job. And if you don't like what you have now, you're going to want to go out there and possibly get one of those guys if you can. Especially because a lot of the guys out there right now are defensive-minded coaches.
Yeah, and I mean, going into the season, I think the Nuggets and the Timberwolves, obviously we mentioned the injuries already, but they're two teams we expected to be higher in the standings. We didn't expect them to probably be fighting for the spot, especially right now. We'd expect Minnesota to be hitting their stride. Same thing with the Nuggets. Obviously, Jimmy Butler and Millsap being out earlier kind of hurt it, but still, not an impressive season so far from these teams.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially if Jimmy Butler is healthy now, I don't think the Timberwolves are in any trouble in making the playoffs, but we're probably still all having the same concerns on whether or not they're going to have enough energy to play, a 7-game series when they have to play that thin lineup.
Exactly. The fatigue would catch up to somebody at some point, and it happened to be Jimmy Butler, who's dealt with Tibbs in the past. So, but moving on to the positive side of the playoff race, two teams, I think are really starting to sneak up on each of their conferences, and that being the Utah Jazz and the Philadelphia 76ers. Both have some great wins, some great stretches. Both of them have Rookie of the Year candidates. And like I mentioned, these teams are really similar in the opposite sense, where the Jazz have the second defensive rating in the NBA, the Sixers the fourth. Offensively, both middle of the pack, with the Jazz being 16th and the Sixers being 13th. So very similar, but out of these two teams, the Jazz and the Sixers, who do you think has a better chance of, making a surprising deep playoff run?
One little fun fact to mention too on my end, even though the Sixers are in the middle of the pack for their offense, in their franchise history, this is the 5th best offensive team they've ever had. So it's been definitely a positive movement.
And it could get higher before the season ends because it's not official yet. So, and they're really starting to cook right now too.
So the original question was, who do I think has been more impressive?
No, who do you think's more likely to have a deep playoff run, like a sneaky playoff run where, who knows, we could see this team end up, in possibly the Western and Eastern Conference Finals?
I'm going to have to say the Philadelphia 76ers, and that's strictly because of conference differences. Obviously, the Western Conference is a lot more stacked. The competition up top, especially between the Rockets, the Warriors, and the Blazers, those teams are all playing really good basketball. The Jazz are going to have to get through one of them or two of them to even get to the Western Conference Finals. I don't see that happening. But on the other end, the Sixers, I mean, the East is still wide open. I mean, the Raptors are obviously the best team, but I don't think anyone will say that they're a lock to like sweep a team in the playoffs. Or
they've been coasting a little bit too. Like, I'm not saying that they're, it's going to hurt them when it comes playoff time, but they definitely taken their foot off the gas, it feels like, over the last week or two.
Yeah, and right, it's probably a little bit of them resting, but it's obviously, a team like the Sixers, especially because there's so many young guys in that team, their energy may be something hard for teams to match at times. Because I think they're going to be extremely fired up, which, that may come down to bite them in the ass. But, if they play with a high level of energy that we've seen them play with, especially this past month, they're tough to beat. And Embiid is, a mismatch. There's not very many centers in the East who can even guard Embiid, especially, centers that are in the playoff conversation. And then the Celtics, to me, that's a team the Sixers could beat up easily. The Sixers really, they could upset the Eastern Conference. I don't think they can make the finals, but if there's anyone who's like a dark horse, I think it's got to be the Sixers.
Yeah, I think just in the fact, like you mentioned, and maybe the Jazz and Sixers switch conferences, we might be talking about the Jazz going to the Eastern Conference Finals. But I think the fact that they're in the East, the Sixers should go farther. You mentioned it, Joel Embiid being a big mismatch for a lot of teams. And then also Ben Simmons, having something to prove and adding some of these trade deadline buyout pieces in Ilyasova and Bellinelli. Also, Markelle Fultz made a return last night. We don't know what he's going to bring, but it's still potentially positive. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But, I mean, what team can't the Sixers upset in the playoffs?
There's no team that they can't upset. I think that's the difference between conferences. In the East, if you really wanted to look at the Eastern Conference, besides probably the Raptors, any one of those teams can lose any one of those matchups. The Eastern Conference is kind of like that this year. Normally, the Eastern Conference is very bad, obviously, and it's considered the worst between the two conferences, the lesser of the two, right? But especially this year, it feels like the talent is very close. Because like Miami, I could see them winning a first round matchup. The Bucks are probably the only team I can't see winning a first round matchup. But that's only
And that's
because
they're just playing trash. Yeah.
exactly. But like the Pacers, if they're playing tenacious defense and they have active hands, they're getting steals and they're running in transition. That's where they're the best. Obviously, LeBron James is LeBron James. You're never going to rule out a Cavaliers team. For the Celtics, to me, that's another team that just because of injuries, you really don't know what to expect. The Raptors have been the best team in the East all year, for a majority of the year. So I'm okay with them. But then, the Sixers with the young guns, for them, it's just about finishing basketball games. If they can finish a game, they'll be okay. The Wizards have taken a step back, and we don't really know the John Wall situation fully, whether or not he's going to play this year, whether or not, when he'll be back on the floor.
Like he will be this year. I mean, he's started like 5-on-5 full court practice. Obviously, he's got to work his way in and see how that knee works. But if I was betting right now, I'd bet John Wall would play. Now, do I know if he's going to be really effective John Wall or kind of the lesser version of John Wall we saw this year? I don't know. And that's a big difference maker for the whole entire Eastern Conference playoffs.
And I don't even know if, especially because like that team isn't as hot as they were, I don't even know if John Wall coming back will be the perfect solution to a team that's already kind of struggling without him. Like, I don't know. I feel like if he was coming back into the mix when everyone was shooting the ball very well, everyone was playing for each other, it may have been easier to put him in. But like, let's say the team continues to struggle and John Wall comes back. I feel like that's when John Wall would be like, all right, I got to take over and lead this team again. And that may not be the best option for that team.
Yeah, especially if he's not 100% healthy. If he is healthy and, finds a way to get his groove, it could be the perfect push. He could end up – it could go either way, I think, with that Wizard situation. But back to the Sixers, Joel Embiid and the Sixers could probably upset almost anybody in the Eastern Conference, even maybe the Raptors if they got lucky or something, or Lowry and DeRozan have really ice-cold shooting, series. And then you look at the Cavs. You don't really want to bet against LeBron, but what would the Cavs do if they faced Embiid?
I mean, you would have to rely on Tristan Thompson so heavily. Kevin Love, of course. We just get Kevin Love back on the floor, and then he gets a concussion, and now we don't know when he's going to be back. If I had to take a guess, especially with how NBA players get concussions, they're out for generally 2 to 3 weeks, it feels like, which is not ideal. Embiid is going to dominate the Cavs. If that was a matchup, if that ends up happening, Embiid may very well average, 25 and 10 for an entire series on them.
Yeah, even more maybe, to be honest.
Exactly, because there's no interior defense for the Cavs. They struggle rebounding, and if, let's say, Kevin Love is out going into the playoffs, and somehow the Sixers and Cavs are a 4-5 matchup, Embiid is like I said before, Embiid is a mismatch. There is no center in the Eastern Conference that can guard Embiid. Valanciunas from the Raptors, no way. Al Horford, I mean, he's a very good defender, but I mean, I'm not giving him 7 games to lock up Embiid. Cavs have no one. Miles Turner's too soft. Whiteside is obviously banged up. Gortat, forget about it. John Henson, no thank you. I'm saying, like, there's no team in the playoff picture in the East that can really match up against Embiid. And if Embiid's going to struggle, it's got to be a bad night, or maybe Ben Simmons isn't getting into the paint and they're relying on Embiid a lot and they're pushing double teams on Embiid. But even still, I really don't see any series where Embiid's going to struggle.
Yeah, I think it would be a team effort defensively. Like you said, I don't see many bigs in the East, especially maybe the entire NBA really matching up well with Embiid. So I think it's more of a team effort when you come to defending him. Like a team like Boston probably would throw out some really weird looks at him. But talking Sixers, so I mentioned Markelle Fultz made his return. What did you think? 10 points, 5 of 13 from the field, 4 rebounds, 8 assists. He showed a little bit of pop. The talent's definitely there. Obviously, it kind of came in some garbage time. Early in the first half, he had some, pretty nice buckets, but still later, most of it came when the Nuggets were out of the game. What were your thoughts on his return?
I mean, it was great. The first layup when he, obviously lays in really nice. And then, of course, we have to mention it. He airballed like his first jump shot, right? Or his second jump shot, whichever one it was. Yeah. It was his first, yeah. But then he had a couple, nothing but net jump shots. I think it's good. He brings something different to this team. Obviously TJ McConnell has been great in his absence. JJ Redick has been great as an off-ball kind of veteran presence. But Markelle Fultz will give this team just another option. I mean, he can run the floor. I mean, if his shoulders are good, he can if he can start shooting mid-range jumpers, that's another aspect of this team that they didn't have before. Obviously, anything that gets Jared Bayless off the court and gives more Markelle Fultz will probably be a plus for this team. I like it. And honestly, it kind of – I don't know why I thought this the other night, but, obviously he went 5 or 13. He had the 8 assists. I kind of just thought about how that big three could mold between Embiid, Fultz, and Ben Simmons. And I'm almost all in on it. I think if Fultz stays healthy and obviously Embiid stays healthy and Ben Simmons continues to progress and maybe gets, some type of jump shot to his game, those three could be very special, especially because Fultz and Simmons are very athletic. I'm just imagining those two running the break, Fultz throwing an oop to Ben Simmons. Or who knows? Maybe Ben Simmons and Fultz are passing the ball back and forth. They throw an alley-oop off the glass of LeBron James next year. Who really knows? It could happen. But I like Fultz. I like the dynamic he brings. The one thing they've missed all year from Philly, in my point of view, is really good guard play. They have all the forwards, the wings. They have the big men. They've had a boatload of big men this year between Trevor Booker for a little bit, getting Ilyasova now. Those two positions, the wings and the bigs, they've had locked up, but it's been the guard position outside of J.J. Redick and T.J. McConnell that's been a question mark. And if Markelle Fultz is healthy and on the floor, he fills the hole that they've been looking for all year.
Yeah, and he gives them a go-to scorer from the guard spot. I think, going forward for the future, you mentioned it being really, dangerous. If Fultz can develop his jump shot and the three-point shot, and then Embiid can kind of improve as a shooter, they're deadly, because Ben Simmons doesn't necessarily have to shoot if he has two really good shooters surrounding him, because he can just be that playmaker. And it looks like Fultz, is obviously comfortable setting up his teammates, but he's more of that scorer, and he could give them some instant offense. I mean, he could even have an impact in this year's playoffs if he gets healthy. Obviously, we've only seen one game, so there's still a lot to be, discovered. But for right now, I would be kind of excited if I was a Sixers fan about what Fultz could really bring to the team for even the next month.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think he may not crack the starting lineup come playoff time, but even still, having Markelle Fultz as a sixth man off the bench, while you have a gritty T.J. McConnell in the starting lineup, it's more than fine, because the Sixers too are one of the Eastern Conference teams, in my opinion, that are very deep. There's a solid nine, almost 10 guys that they can play at one time on that team.
And adding to that with Fultz is definitely a big deal. So, but moving on to another, some recent news. It was released that Dirk says he's going to return for the NBA season next year. What are your thoughts on Dirk not retiring and returning?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned when the pod started, my knees are feeling good. I don't know how his knees are feeling, because he walks on the floor, man, it looks really painful, and he looks awkward and uncomfortable, and it bothers me now. And he's not that great anymore. Obviously, Dirk is a Hall of Famer, first ballot Hall of Famer, and he's been phenomenal. But if he wants to play. I'm never going to tell a guy what to do with his career, with his life. I don't personally think he serves any positive purpose to the Mavs as a player anymore. I mean, as a veteran leadership and all that, yeah, there's so much wisdom and knowledge in that head of his for him to pass down. But I mean, his playing days, I mean, there's surely, if the Mavs want to play winning basketball and compete, Dirk isn't really in those plans, in my opinion. If you want to win basketball, Dirk can't be on the floor for more than 15 minutes. It's not this point of his career anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's in the Mavs situation, they might end up tanking again next year, because I don't know if 1 year of tanking is good enough to get them like the players that they need, because the roster has a ton of veterans, so maybe it doesn't really matter. I think next year he probably plays less minutes and less games, where you see him take a lot of time off, because like you mentioned, it definitely looks to be a struggle out there sometimes. Are you surprised that he's returning, or you thought, you kind of expected it?
I mean, I'm not surprised, only because he's still been, I think I saw a stat that he's hitting like a career high 3-point percentage, possibly.
Yeah, he can still knock down a jumper for sure.
Yeah, like
he's
a three. Yeah, like he's not. There's still parts of his game that are still very viable to this current NBA style. And we've seen big men last a little bit longer, especially guys like him, like Tim Duncan. Guys. Yeah, Tim Duncan lasted a little bit longer probably than he should have. He probably actually could have played longer if he wanted to. Pau Gasol is still maintaining. Guys like that who have pushed their game back and learned how to shoot the ball more efficiently. So I'm not totally surprised. And Dirk's obviously, he's in like the milestone part of his career where he can still, jump a couple of guys in all-time points and all-time field goals made and all that good stuff. So, there's still stuff he can do in his career, even in a limited role and such. So I'm not totally surprised. But, it's from the Mavs perspective as an organization, I wouldn't be jumping up and down for the fact that Dirk wants to come back for a year.
He does help him sell tickets at least, because
that's true. That's true. He is a selling point. I know, he obviously won them a title, so you're never going to turn your back on Dirk.
And they've had a really good relationship in the sense where Dirk's taking less money. I wouldn't be surprised if they wanted to be like, Dirk, could you take less money? You want to sign a big name player? I wouldn't be that surprised.
Yeah. If not, though, I wouldn't be surprised if they gave him one big payday just to end. If they have the money for 1 year and they give him, maybe kind of like what we saw Kobe get, even though Kobe got way, 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 way too much his final 2-year deal. But maybe Dirk gets like a nice $15 to $20 million 1-year deal or something like that for just time played.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I would be so opposed to that because I'd be like, cap space is value, especially where you could take like a dump contract and then who knows, it could be Markelle, you get a first and second round pick type of thing. But hey, you never know. Mark Cuban definitely has done some strange things. But talking Western Conference still, earlier this week, Isiah Thomas left the Lakers, went to get another opinion on his hip. Then it came out today that he's going to undergo hip surgery. What are your thoughts on this and, Isiah's future?
Well, first off, I hope he has a speedy recovery. I hope he gets back on the court as soon as possible. It's been a shitty year for Isiah Thomas. Sister passing still not even a year ago. Getting hurt in the playoffs with Boston, playing through the injury, getting eliminated in the playoffs, getting traded in the offseason, then, having obviously the rehab take a long time for him to get back on the court, then playing 10 games just to be told you can't play on this team, getting traded away from that team, and then going to the Lakers. And then, of course, you're on the Lakers and your hip's not right. You're not playing very well in general to start, at least efficiency-wise. And then you go for an opinion on your hip, and it's surgery, and you're a free agent. You are expecting a big payday, especially after the type of MVP caliber year you had last year. And now everything is up in question. There's no certainty right now for Isiah Thomas. So I feel for him on that, and it's extremely, I'm sure, frustrating and everything else. But, I mean, maybe that's why he struggled all year. He didn't play that good this year. He never shot very well. He didn't look as aggressive going to the basket as he did in years past. So maybe the hip was never right this year, and maybe that's why he struggled. And who knows? Maybe he gets his hip surgery, he rehabs it, obviously, for another year, and he comes back in the offseason. He gets signed to a 1-year deal or a 1-and-1 deal, and he plays his ass off and ends up getting a major payday next offseason instead. But I'm certainly sure that he's to a degree probably upset with how the last year has transpired.
Yeah, there definitely is a lot of question marks with the whole thing because if you recall, he did have the hip injury when he was playing in Boston. He elected to not get it right away, the surgery right away, and then it kind of lingered. Then he got it after the playoffs because it got so bad. And now he's kind of dealing with it all year. Then there was talk about him maybe coming back too soon this year. And now it's like he's going to be in a really weird situation. Like you feel for him in terms of how bad like the contract situation went. It went from him looking like he was going to be, a very highly paid player this summer, probably getting a multi-year deal, to now, like you said, probably getting a 1-year prove-it deal, especially coming off that hip surgery right now and not having another chance to play this season. And like you mentioned, he's going to have to probably rehab a little bit. It's not a crazy surgery or anything, I believe, but still, like teams are going to be wary, especially already with the limitations of his game.
And this is a guy who's 30. We know that guys who are short don't generally have a nice, fruitful, long career. So a guy who's undersized and 30, hip surgery, 2 hip injuries to a degree. And who knows, if he gets a 1-and-1 deal and he doesn't prove it, then we're talking about Isiah Thomas probably never getting that money that he was so close to getting.
Yeah, I mean, and the sad part is it was life-changing money too. It's not like I don't think he would have ever really got a max from anybody, even at that level, because it's just like still so many question marks. But right now it's like really unknown how much money he's going to get. It probably a lot depends on his health come free agency time and what teams can see from him.
And that's another thing, Nick. You said like the teams. There is not going to be a huge market for a 30-year-old point guard with 2 hip injuries, 2 hip surgeries, and coming off a very down year and is undersized, doesn't play a ton of defense. I mean, the market this offseason for him will be very, very thin.
And some questionable, statements here and there too.
Right, especially because who knows? If it's Isiah Thomas, so you have to think that he's going to tell every team he meets with this offseason, I'm a starter. And I don't know if any team's going to want to take him on as a starter.
I wouldn't want him as a starter. And I'm not saying that to be mean or anything, but I just would hate going into a starting lineup and having somebody that's such a defensive liability right off the bat, where you can't even really hide them to an extent. You need a perfect matchup to hide somebody at that caliber of defense, and that's nothing against him. It's just physical limitations. But talking about a small guard, Trey Burke lit it up against the Charlotte Hornets. Dropped 42 points, 19 to 13 from the field, 12 assists, 2 turnovers. The Knicks lost, but huge game from Trey Burke, who's been playing really well for the Knicks this season. What are your thoughts on him in the future with the team?
Well, I mean, man, Calvin Cambridge has been fantastic. He's been everything and more. The Knicks needed to get somebody like Mike, and they got Trey Burke. No, he's been great, man. He's been ball. I hope everybody understands the reference. I know you did. I hope everyone else did. He's been great. I know we went out for your birthday for a couple drinks and had some nice food. He was on the TV balling out against the Celtics, and I mean it's incredible where he was just a year ago to where he is now. He's turned his game around full circle. And I tweeted about it the other night. I feel like the Knicks, for some reason, they seem to get these players that just go on these crazy runs. Obviously, they had Linsanity. They just find these kind of, what's the word? Like fire in a bucket, spark in a bucket, wherever the saying is, a flash in a pan. They get these guys who explode for them. Maybe it's playing in the biggest sports city in the world.
I think that's some of it too. The extra energy of playing for the Knicks, playing in New York. It's just like there's some extra vibe about it. And I think you're right. When Linsanity, who was it, Alexei Sved or something, who had like a crazy triple-double stretch for them. And then Trey Burke, and Burke, it's impressive because, if you watch the rest of his career in terms of the NBA, there wasn't a ton of flash where you're like, when he got drafted, you was like, oh, he's going to be so good. And then things didn't really work out in Utah. He was with Washington a little bit. I think he bounced around somewhere else too. It just really hasn't worked out. And then he comes to the Knicks, and I think the efficiency is the most impressive thing. 12 points a game, 52% from the field, 38% from three, 4 assists, and just 1 turnover. Now, similar to Isiah Thomas, he's never going to be a defensive, lockdown type player just because of his size and physical limitations. But that type of efficiency off the bench is something a team can need. And I think for the Knicks right now, with the Porzingis injury kind of setting them back, and it looks like they're going to go kind of more towards that full rebuild type of thing, I think he's a good stopgap guy you don't mind keeping around. And worst case, when you get good, he's a guy you have off the bench that gives you some instant offense.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's no point on getting rid of him. Who knows? Maybe you keep him too, and maybe next year at the trade deadline he plays like this again, and you're able to move him for a late first round draft pick or something to a contending team,
or even a young player like another guy, a prospect or something. There's a lot of options. I mean, and it's kind of nice for the Knicks in the sense that Emmanuel Mudiay has been pretty bad. I know a lot of New York media has really killed him. So having at least one of the point guards that you kind of picked up do well kind of eases the load.
Yeah, Moody had a nice start to his tenure. It obviously has not gone so great afterwards. But then again, there's still a lot of the only good thing about both these guys, Moutier and Trey Burke, is both these guys are still young. So, I mean, you can still take a chance on them, especially Trey Burke. He's 25, I think, now.
Yeah, 25.
I'm sure the Wizards are pissed because they could have used a backup point guard like Trey Burke.
Some of it'll be seen, though, too, is no offense to the Knicks, they're not a very good team. There's not anybody who's really taken over the show. He's getting the ball, a lot of touches. Like I mentioned, he has been efficient, but still, in a winning situation, we haven't seen him have success.
Right. He could be Michael Carter-Williams Jr. Maybe not as bad, but.
Yeah, it could be something like you said, similar to just a Knicks player really taking off or something along those lines. But before we get out of here real quick, I got a quick game for you. All right, so we mentioned it we hinted at early on. There's a lot of injuries going around. A lot of guys are banged up. So I'm going to ask you which guy was a bigger return for their team. And you just real quick give me an answer right off the top.
All right.
Curry or Kyrie Irving?
Shit, Curry.
Yep. Oh, that's a tough one, though, to be honest. But I think you're right because Curry's back. He's a better player.
All I'm thinking is who has more of a chance of winning a title back in the lineup. And I think the Warriors with Curry have a better chance than Kyrie and the Celtics.
John Wall or Kevin Love?
John Wall. Oh, that's tough, though. That's a tough one. John Wall, but that's a tough one.
It is because Wall's definitely obviously the better player, especially when healthy. But Love is that second player, and he's that cog that kind of gives LeBron a little bit of rest offensively because he can kind of do some stuff on his own.
Yeah.
Marcus Smart or Jaylen Brown?
Marcus Smart, heart and soul of that team.
Jimmy Butler or John Wall?
Jimmy Butler, both sides of the floor, leader, and yeah, Jimmy Butler.
Jimmy Butler or Kyrie Irving?
Still Jimmy Butler. His impact has been felt. I mean, the Celtics still win without Kyrie. The Timberwolves struggle a lot more without Jimmy Butler.
All right, Curry or Butler?
Curry. I can't. It's Curry.
Steph. But all right, that wraps it up for today. Hopefully all those guys we just mentioned will be fully healthy for the playoffs because we do not want to see anybody complain about injuries or see anybody hurt. We want to see the best teams possible. And as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for hopping on, Kory. And you can listen to NBA Outlet on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OGBasketball.com, and now airing on Dash Radio.
I'm out with my Gucci flip-flops.